Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshak if you want to call me by my in-game name, and another month brings another monthly meta. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how these videos are put together and kind of the lay of the land, I talk about and go over the most popular / best decks that are currently found in Hearthstone when you queue into ladder, what you're going to see 90-95% of the time. Keep in mind that the decks I'm going to show you are my renditions of the best decks. So the foundation of the decks are there, but there'll be a couple minor tech cards that I'll point out, like why I play this instead of that. I'll also go over the kind of pros and cons of each of the popular decks and kind of what makes them what they are, and like why do people play it, and then why do people prefer other styles. I'll also go into if there's anything funky about the deck or any changes that have occurred recently. Of course, I'll cover those as well. So without further ado, let's head into Mage. I believe the first Mage we're going to talk about is going to be the Control Mage. This was seen a lot at the most recent HTC Summer Championship. A lot of people ran the Control Mage, and a lot of the casters were wondering kind of why, because the win rate on this deck was exceedingly low based on the field. It does have a couple favorable matchups, which is why I'm assuming they brought it to the HTC Summer Championships, because it does fairly well against a lot of the control decks and also pretty well against a lot of the aggro decks. But if it doesn't have any threats, its main threat is Frostlich Jaina. If you basically don't draw Frostlich Jaina, this deck is just so not as good. Like, if Frostlich Jaina wasn't a card, this deck wouldn't exist. So because it's so dependent on that late game be able to basically continuously summon water elementals, that's what brings its weakness. Also on ladder, you can't choose what you kind of queue into, which also provides this deck with a huge weakness. And then in the tournament scene, you actually can queue and ban particular matchups to allow this deck to be able to thrive a little bit better. So as popular as this particular mage deck is on ladder, I actually don't think it's that great at the moment, due to the fact that it's so heavily dependent on Frostlich, and you don't get to ban certain classes. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how this deck runs, it basically stalls and has a ton of removal until the late game, where you're able to play like basically Lich King, Alexstrasza, Dragoncaller, Alina, and Frostlich Jaina, which obviously is the best out of all of those depending on your matchup, but most of the time it is. And you basically put those together, be able to summon a whole large quantity of water elementals with cards like, you know, Voodoo Doll Ping, Polymorph Ping, you know, some sort of AoE, then Ping, water elementals, and then win from there. This deck used to run like Pyroblast and Syndragosa, but it's obviously been modified to the point where it doesn't run those anymore. It's trimmed the fat, but those are some cool cards that you can put in this deck if you're wanting to get a little bit wonky. Not one of the top decks I would recommend for if you're wanting to ladder, but definitely a cool deck, and it's actually more popular than I thought. And the popularity, again, the reason I bring up the HTC Summer Championships is because it was played there a lot, and what people see in tournaments, they try to replicate that on ladder, and not all ladder decks are good tournament decks, and not all tournament decks are good ladder decks, if that makes sense. And people see this deck and they're like, I gotta play it on ladder, and then they do, then it ends up like shit, and then they wonder why. But it's still popular, so it needs to be brought up. The second mage deck that we're going to discuss is going to be the Tempo Mage, and this is, in my opinion, a much better deck to play on ladder at the moment, a much stronger deck, and also a much cheaper deck. Even with the most recent hit to the deck, with losing a lot of its core minion pieces with the set rotation, Tempo Mage is seemingly still pumping out large quantities of damage in the early game. If it gets, the nut draw with the Mana Worm, Arcanologist, Kirin Mage into Secret, into being able to fireball a minion into turn 5, Frostbolt Secret into turn 6 a Lunith. I mean, this deck can destroy anything. On top of that, there's a lot of really greedy decks out there at the moment. Looking at you guys, Taunt Druid and Shuttercucks. This deck definitely can steamroll those decks a lot. Its weaknesses are definitely leaning towards like the Paladin and Odd Rogue, just because it's able to basically swarm the board, make a lot of trades, and make a lot of minions, making this deck have to go on the burn plan much sooner than it normally has to. Because normally, if this deck plays against another like mid-range or control-based deck, this deck has some time to be able to play minions, draw cards, use utility spells to kill minions, do a little bit of face with the minions it has, then go full-out burn plan later. But when you're playing against another aggressive-based deck, or a deck that has a lot of minions, this deck can't basically go minion for minion because it doesn't have a lot, and then it has to go on the burn plan earlier, which means it's going to be giving up the board state. If your opponent controls the board, you're taking minion damage every turn. What does more over the course of 2 to 3 turns, a bunch of minions on the board, or 1 or 2 spells per turn. Most of the time it's the minions if you're leaning towards the early to mid stages of the game. Sorry if that was a lot to consume, but definitely Tempo Mage is not one of like the newer decks to come out, so I didn't really want to cover it too much, but it's definitely, in my opinion, if you're looking to play control Mage or Tempo Mage, I would lean towards Tempo Mage at the moment. It doesn't have to be this exact build. This is my build, but definitely, in my opinion, we need to push up on those really greedy control decks that are getting a little too crazy. Like I played some control Warlock that had like it ran Elise, it ran Zola, it ran the card that put Elise back into his deck. He had like 5 packs. And the only reason that was possible is because of all the fucking Taunt Druid and Shutter Shamans and every person running all these super greedy decks that are like 45-minute games. I love control, but Jesus, there's a point where it's like, all right, you can simmer down. I get it. You're going to get wrecked by any person playing aggro, and that's where the Tempo Mages come in, and they clean up the crop. Next class we're going to take a look at going to be Hunter. More specifically right here we have the Recruit / Big Hunter. This deck recently ended up popping up on ladder. It was actually seen a little bit in the HTC Summer Championships. It's also seen quite a bit on ladder. It's, in my opinion, it is more popular at the moment than the No Minion Hunter and the Mid-Range Hunter. Mid-Range Hunter being the least popular spell hunter, than this being the most popular, which is awesome. It's super cool deck. It's kind of annoying to play against. Because if they get the early Seeping Oozling into something crazy, they coin, they play dead, it can get a little out of hand quickly. But in my opinion, we played this deck quite a bit. We went on quite a tear with it. On ladder, we went from like rank 5 to rank 3 with 0 losses. So it is a good deck. This is the build that I was able to do that with. The core of the deck, obviously it plays no 2-drop, so Prince, but what makes this deck good is you basically stall, and until turn 6, I should say, you play your Seeping Oozling. Oozling's Battle Cry allows you to copy a Death Rattle in the deck, and that's where your Silver Vanguard and your Cathena Winter Wisp come into play. It copies one of those, use Play Dead on your Oozling. Your Oozling then is able to summon either Lich King, King Crush, or your Charged Devilsaur. From there, those cards can either attack face right away, because King Crush does have charge, or the Devilsaur, it doesn't have rush, but because it comes from your deck directly, you don't actually have to use its Battle Cry, it can attack directly. And you can do upwards of like 20 plus damage in a single turn. I've added 1 kill command for the additional burst, because most of these decks don't play kill command, so that's, of course, I've got to play at least 1. But besides that, a lot of people don't like the Tar Creepers. Take them out if you don't like them. Tar Creepers aren't the core of this deck, guys. The core of this deck is basically Seeping Oozling, Silver Vanguard, Charged Devilsaur, Lich King, Cathena, and King Crush. Those are the and Witchwood Grizzly. Those are like the main portions of what makes the combo work. The rest of the deck is just fluff. Fill it in as you please. If you don't have Prince, don't worry about it. Fill it in with something else. It's not a core card. It is a legendary, but it's not one of the core pieces. If you don't have King Crush, unfortunately, that is a core piece. You can't really run this deck without King Crush. So again, kind of know what you can and can't switch out on decks like this. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comment section below of like, hey, Rob, I have this amount. I've got this, but don't have this, and I will either respond to you, or hopefully someone else will see your call and will also be able to help you out. The second deck that I have mentioned was the No Minion Hunter. This is probably, I believe this is much cheaper. Like, let me go back. This is 5,100, and this one's, yeah, 10K. So the No Minion Hunter, much cheaper. Does, again, fairly well. If you had to go between the two, I would say in like the win percentages and like, you know, how easy and difficulty you play, it kind of evens out. So if you're, you know, a more budget based player, lean towards the No Minion Hunter. You'll get, you know, if you learn the deck, play well, it'll treat you right just as well as the Recruit Hunter will. The Recruit Hunter is for more of those people who have the legendaries, have the cards to make a little bit different deck than what they're normally used to playing. So the No Minion Hunter, been around for a little bit now, still a very strong deck in my opinion, still punishes the very control-based classes, the very greedy decks, definitely can pump out a ton of damage over the course of just 1 or 2 turns. The Spellstone, definitely one of the strongest cards in this deck, the ability to play, you know, Hero Power, Secret Coin into Spellstone is crazy. Misdirection, again, some people, like, there's always going to be that 1 or 2 comments where like, Rob, why do you run Misdirection? It's like, that's 1 fucking card out of 30 fucking cards. simmer down, change the card if you don't like it. I know I say that in every single one of these, but there's always that one fucking person that triggers me and asks some stupid shit. And I'm like, dude, it's the core of the deck that matters. It's not the 1 or 2 cards that I choose to put in there because people don't expect them. And the cards that people don't expect end up winning you games that normally you wouldn't win because they don't expect those cards. But of course, you know, the brain dead players that just copy pasta a deck and play it right away and put no thought into actually changing cards to try to make the deck better, they would never understand that. But, you know, 90% of you will understand that. And that's my comments aren't directed towards you, to you guys. They're directed towards the other, you know, they're basically directed toward the Shutter Shamans. That's who my comments are being directed to. And if you play Shutter Shaman and you're not brain dead, I'm sorry, but most of you sorry, not sorry. Moving to Priest, we've got the Control Priest. This is, again, I figured I should include at least one Priest deck because it's not the most irrelevant class on ladder, but you don't really see a lot of Priest at all. And if you see Priest, it's probably going to be some form of combo / control Priest. And if you see a lot of Priest, you're like, wow, I can't believe you didn't cover these 4 decks. I play hundreds of games every season, every month. I don't see a lot of Priest at all. I think I've played against 4 Priests in total the entirety of this past month. And it was all either Control Priest or some sort of combo Control Priest. And it basically revolves around being able to draw a shit ton of cards, put a decent amount of minions on the board, put in a little chip damage, and then go with the Shadow Reaper Anduin Mind Blast Alexstrasza combo. So basically, the Alexstrasza puts you down to 15. The Shadow Reaper Anduin allows you to basically hero power each turn for 2 damage, and it refreshes every time you play a spell. So you play hero power, Mind Blast, hero power, Mind Blast, and it's like, what, like 15 or 16 damage in a single turn, plus chip damage if you Alexstrasza the turn before. So pretty good deck. Does fairly well. Actually, it does fairly well against a lot of decks right now, just because people don't expect it because of how little Priest is found currently on ladder. Token Druid being able to Psychic Scream when they go with their Whispering Woods into Soul of the Forest, being able to return all of those shitty wisps into their deck, which allows them to draw into really bad, they're basically drawing into 1-mana 1/1s, is really, really nice. So not a bad deck to play. Also being able to like Mass Dispel into the Dustbreaker is pretty good if you don't happen to have the Psychic Scream, but most of the time you are because you're able to Shadow Visions and grant those cards. So actually, if you're looking to play a pretty cheesy, very good against aggro, decent against control Priest deck, this is a great choice for you guys. Moving towards Warlock, I believe we're looking at the Control Warlock here. This is my most recent addition to Control Warlock. I've tried a whole bunch of different brews of it, and for some reason I can't get Control Warlock to work as well. Like it does well against other control decks, but I can't get it to win as much as I want it to when I know it can win. So this is my most recent rendition of Control Lock. Again, if you don't like Known Feratu, you want to put Rin back in there. You don't like 1 Dark Possession, you want to play 2 Dark Pact. Again, those are just minor tech choices. The main part of this deck is Blood Reaver, you know, Void Lords, Twisting Nether, Gut Joffreys, Siphon Souls, stuff like that. But this deck has seemingly worked out really well for me. The 2 Gluttonous Oozes does really well against Paladins, Hunters, and Rogues. The ability to have a bunch of early game with Defiles, Librarians, Dark Pact, and all that stuff. Lackeys, Dreadlords, again, against Paladins, phenomenal. And then your late game, of course, consists of the Twisting Nether, Void Lords, Joffreys, and Black Knight. The Black Knight, because there's so many even, so many Taunt Druids, so many even Warlocks out there. I mean, the ability to kill a Sleepy Dragon with your 6-mana card is great. Tar Creepers are pretty good, too. Black Knight, great tech card at the moment, and of course Despicable Dreadlord with all the Paladins. I mean, just slaughter the board, right? Who needs Defile when you've got a Despicable Dreadlord coming out? But if you happen to see if you don't see a lot of Paladin, then you can take out the Dreadlord. But for the most part, it does very, very well. And obviously, the key of this deck is it basically is always going to outvalue any Cubelock or any even lock if you play in the value matchup. Just make sure they don't burst you down too hard. I don't think I've ever lost against an even Warlock with this list at all. Like, it's just like this deck does everything the even deck does, but better. They play Giant, you play Siphon Soul. They play Giant or Twilight Drake, you play Spellbreaker. Like this deck just has so many answers to big minions, and you just have so many more threats than them. You have Void Lords, you've got Gluttonous Ooze, you've got Gnome Feratsu. The only card that this deck doesn't run is Rin, and that is because there's so much silence out there, and there's no deck that Rin actually does really well against besides maybe Control Mage. All the other decks, if you're playing against it, like Taunt Druid, you're like, Rob, you need to play, or Shudder, you're like, Rob, you need to play Rin against Shudder, and then you need to Dark Pact it on 7 or coin it out, and then Dark Pact it. It's like, dude, they draw their whole deck by the time you even finish the thing. Like, they between Taunt Druid and Shudder, between Mana Tide's Farsight, Mana Tide, and Alkali to Pain, Volcano, Ultimate Infestation, Branching Paths, Nourish, between all those cards, the decks draw. They will literally draw their entire deck before you finish the seals. So Rin is pointless. So that's why Gnome Feratsu, at least you can mill 2 cards guaranteed if you can draw them, and that's better than doing nothing with Rin. If you like Rin better, you put her in there, but I've tried it so many games, I can never seem to get the seal done. I've tapped my heart away. I'm like, I gotta seal, I gotta kill the deck, let's go, and then it never kills the deck. And I'm like, fuck. I'm like, I can't do it. So you can try, and if it happens to work for you 1 out of every 10 times, congratulations, but I'd rather go for the mill than fucking bash my head in because I didn't complete my seals quick enough. Next Warlock deck we're going to cover is the Cubelock. This is by far, in my opinion, the best Warlock deck to play. I can't believe I just said that because I fucking hate Cubelock, and I hate Shudder Shaman more than Cubelock, but I still don't like Cubelock because of all the PTSD it gave to me before the nerfs happened. But in my opinion, still the best Warlock deck to play right now. It has the best burst potential. It does well against almost every single matchup. There's so many, like being able to basically play the Skull on 5 and then Doomguard, Void Daddy, Gul'dan on 10 with Giants and fucking Cubes and Umbra. Like if you just draw the nuts with this deck, it beats anything. This deck will beat anything if you draw correctly and you get the good. But you can kind of say that about everything, Tempo Mage and blah, blah, blah. But still, being able to have a deck that you can tap to be able to draw things, and being able to tap allows you to draw what you need, you know, more often, which increases the consistency of the deck. So, good deck to play. Still very relevant. A lot of people think it died out. I think it's still one of the best decks to play if you're looking to grind and get, you know, up there in the ranks. And again, I'm talking to like push ranks 5 through Legend. Hopefully you're not playing this deck at rank 15, you know. I mean, you can play it at 15, but if you're playing this deck at 15 exactly how it is and you're not ranking up and you're like, Rob, this deck sucks. No, the deck doesn't suck. You kind of suck. No offense. Like, you just can't play a tier 1 deck card for card, be at rank 15, and then blame me for the deck. It's like, it doesn't work like that. I'm sorry. Like, we hit a Legend with our budget Hunter deck, and then people were like, Rob, I'm rank 19. I can't win with this budget Hunter deck. It sucks. I'm like, bro, I went from rank 5 to Legend with the same deck. It's not deck. Trust me. The other Warlock deck I want to look at is going to be the Even Warlock deck. And very popular, probably the most popular of all the Warlocks right now. If I had to guess, Even Shaman comes in first, then Cube, then Control at the last place. A lot of people don't run the Mossy Horrors and Curse of Weakness. I found those cards absolutely phenomenal. They're so good. They work for me. Every time I have them, I'm glad I have them. If you watched any of our Even Lock videos, you've seen how much I praise these cards. I'm just like, holy shit, look at this. I kill their whole board. It's so great. Even with double twisting Nether, being able to, like, let's say if a hunter on turn 5 plays Spellstone and then you drop a Curse of Weakness twice, they do no damage to you the next turn. You reduce their attack of all of their minions by 4. They do no damage, and that gives you time to either draw into what you need or tap into what you need, or then play a card that you have, like Mossy Horror, that you wouldn't have been able to play before. So just a fantastic combination of cards. I know it looks funky. If you don't like it, take it out. But besides that, to be able to play Giants on turn 3 is incredibly powerful as well. If you have, you go second, you tap again, then you play Giant. Craziness. Most of the time, every time I play against the Even Shaman, they happen to have a Drake and or a Giant on turn either 3 or 4 or both, which is stupid, but they have it every time because of the fact that they can tap every turn. Very powerful deck. Definitely one of the better ones on ladder. Kind of hard to play, It's not the easiest of decks to play. It kind of falls under, I don't want to say it's as hard as old Handlock because it doesn't run Molten Giant and all that shenanigans. But it's still a pretty, it's not as easy as, you know, Shutter Shaman, you know, Base Hunter, Odd Rogue. It's not that easy, but it's still it's still difficult, but not as hard as like Miracle Rogue and stuff like that. Taking a look at the next class is going to be Druid. It's going to be more specifically Malygos Druid. Super cool, super fun, and a very difficult to play deck if you're looking to play a very I don't want to say it's super difficult, but it's a much harder deck, probably even harder than the Handlock / even Warlock deck we had just gone over, and that's just because you have to utilize your resources very efficiently and line up combos. A cool combo in this deck that I really like a lot and people don't suspect is when you play Twig of the World Tree, right? And let's say they Gluttonous Ooze or Acidic Swamp Ooze, right? They give you up to 10 mana. You don't get to use it on your turn, so you don't get to do the combo of being able to basically have 20 mana a single turn. That's when you play Rummaging Nobold. You bring back Twig of the World Tree and you get to replay it again, so you get to try to redo your combo once again. So that's a little combo that I have in there that I was like, it could work, and it actually worked out a few games. But besides that, if you don't like the Rummaging Noble, you can play one of the princes where it able to copy a card on your board. So you basically, you know, Malygos, then you can prince your Malygos, faceless your Malygos, and a double Moonfire or Innervate Swipe, and you have 3 Malygos down, and you do shit ton of damage. But besides that, the deck runs as follows. In the early game, you're basically just stalling. You have very limited single target removal. Naturalize is basically all you have besides the Spellstone. Swipe does okay, but again, not one of the best removals in the game. Towards your mid game is where you really pick up Spreading Plague, Malfurion, and allows you to survive. Then from there, Lich King, Malygos, Ultimate Infestation is your super late game in combination with cards like Moonfire. And hopefully you don't use swipe on minions, because you want to hold swipes and Moonfires for your Malygos and your Faceless combo and your Twig. But if you can't seem to do that, you gotta hold your 2 Moonfires. But if you're using your Moonfires and your swipes on minions, your Malygos ain't doing shit. I mean, you can UI for 10 if your Malygos can live, or you can line up like a Twig into Malygos. But this deck, like I said, you have to utilize resources to be able to, like, you know, balance between removing minions with your spells and keeping spells to use with Malygos. So definitely a really good deck. A lot of people go on a really big win streaks with these, and a lot of people don't know how to play around the Malygos Druid because it's a very difficult deck to play 100% correctly. So when you do find yourself versing a good Malygos Druid player, you're going to get stomped on because you just don't know how the deck performs, how much damage they can do in a single turn, and the amount of, you know, what they can set up. The next Druid deck we're going to take a look at is going to be the Taunt Druid. I know a lot of you guys love and or hate the Taunt Druid. It's one of those decks where it's just like, not another Taunt Druid. And then you got the guy playing Taunt Druid. He's like, oh yeah, Taunt Druid. Oh yeah, give me some Hadronox. So I don't want to go over this deck too much because I'm sure you guys have seen it more than enough times on ladder, but it basically just, throughout the game, you're ramping up, you're playing taunt minions. Later in the game, you're playing Master Oakheart and or just Hadronox, naturalizing your own Hadronox so it doesn't get polymorphed. Then from there, you Witching Hour, Carnivorous Cube kills Hadronox, makes a board full of taunts. They kill Cube, makes 2 Hadronox, Cube another Hadronox, make a board full of taunts. It's basically just a board-centric taunt deck that revolves around being able to kill 1 minion over and over and over again. Its weaknesses are playing against Shaman and or Mage, where they're able to hex any minion, turn it into a sheep. A sheep's a beast, so when they use their Witching Hour, the sheep gets revived instead of Hadronox. Another way to mitigate this is to play a warrior and then use the 2 mana, I can't think of something, Century. She summons 3 raptors for your opponents. All of those are beasts, so, you know, if you can kill those beasts, they have a higher chance to pull one of those 1/1 raptors instead of Hadronox again. And yeah, really good deck. A lot of people play it. Really annoying to play against. Another Druid deck that we probably haven't seen. Where's my transit? There it is. Another Druid deck that we don't see a lot of, but needs to be mentioned because I'm pretty sure it's going to be on the rise soon because of how many people mentioned it. HCC Summer Championship, and it's still a deck that's semi-relevant and still can steamroll you. And that's going to be the Spiteful Druid. In my opinion, still a really strong deck. Requires one of the least amount of skill. Basically, because there's only 2 spells in the entire deck, you just play a minion every turn and either go face or make value trades. That's the entire deck. There's nothing besides that. You just Play a minion every turn. Does it go face or does it make a value trade? If it doesn't make a value trade, it goes face. If it makes a value trade, it trades. Very simple. Very, very easy. Pretty brain dead. The last Druid deck we'll cover is Token Druid. And this deck, very, very good. Works well against specifically Control Mage and stuff like that. The ability to go with the Whispering Woods into the Soul of the Forest is absolutely insane. Your opponent has to have basically double removal. If they do not, you basically just go double Savage Roar or Savage Roar Branch Pass or Power of the Wild, Savage Roar, Savage Roar. There's a multitude of cards that you can play to buff your board and get lethal in a single turn if your opponent cannot clear the double wave of 1/1s and 2/2s. Besides that, there's no ramp really in this deck besides the wild. I mean, there is ramp, but it's not like you're in this deck. You're not trying to ramp to 10 as fast as possible. Like, you have the ability to do like a slow game, go Oaken Summons and Violet Teacher, play a bunch of minions, then Savage Roar. But I guess if you have UI in your hand, you have a Wild Growth and a Nourish, then you go with the ramp plan. So it all basically depends on what you have and how the what your matchup looks like. So it's not as rampy as like, let's say the Taunt Druid is, that most of the minions are pretty big, so you're trying to get to your O-Cart, your Sleepy Dragons, your Dragon Hatchers really, really soon. Very fun deck to play, a lot of ways to play it and a lot of things to do each turn. If you haven't played Token Druid yet, highly recommend it. For some reason it doesn't have the dust count here, and I think that's because I made it too big. No, it's because I took a picture of my actual in-game. So sorry there's no dust count on this one, guys. I didn't put it through my dust count calculator. My bad. So moving on to the next class we're going to talk about, and that's going to be Warrior. The first Warrior deck we're going to take a look at is going to be the Taunt Warrior, the straight up Baku Taunt Warrior. This is the deck I believe 2 months ago I hit Legend with. Prior to that was with our budget Hunter list. But really fun deck. I know the Mountain Fire Armor looks kind of weird, but you know me, I like weird cards. Mountain Fire Armor is a 3-mana 4/3, does well against priests, and if aggro decks want to kill it, we gain 6 armor. If aggro decks don't want to kill it, we're going to be able to kill their minions and or go face for 4. Overall, the deck just plays minions every turn, whether they're taunt and or draw ability cards. Then from there, we determine whether or not we want to value our gain 4 armor per turn over our Ragnaros, or we go Ragnaros over the gain 4 armor. Normally, depending on the matchup, let's say we play Odd Rogue, this deck can just outvalue Odd Rogue by itself, so we just go for the armor until we feel comfortable. Playing maybe something like a Control Mage, we could go for the the Ragnaros hero power, don't play any minions, and then just keep hitting them in the face for 8 every turn, as their deck doesn't really run any minions. The only way they're able to generate minions is if we play minions and then they ping them and kill them. But if we don't ever play any minions, they can't ever make any minions, therefore we can just hit them in the face every turn. So it all depends on your matchup of how you play it out. Very interesting deck. I like it a lot. You know me, I love my Warrior. This is one way to run the quest deck. The other way to run the quest deck is this rendition here that does not run Baku. A lot of people run this deck over the one that I was running, but of course with me, I've got to play my tank up, spank up, gain 4 armor. I love the Control Warrior style, so I run that style instead. But this is another style that people do play, and is a little bit more popular than the one that I was running. Both have seen huge success recently, and do very, very well against the more aggro decks on ladder, and it also does fairly well against the control decks because of the the Ragnaros 2-mana deal 8 damage to a random creature and or hero on board. But the problem is it's very, very weak to the Shutter Shaman, and a lot of people love Shutter Shaman, which is, I believe, coming up very, very soon. That is literally our next. So looking at the Shutter Shaman, I don't want to cover the deck this too much. This is my absolute least favorite deck to play against on ladder. I think you have to be a very degenerate player to play this deck. I understand if you're playing in a tournament, you know what I mean? And you need to win because you're winning money and it's for your lifestyle, and you want to play the best decks and the most cheap decks to play that require literally no skill. This is the deck for you. But if you're, you're just, playing Hearthstone because you want to play the best deck, so you don't want to think about anything, this I guess is the best deck too, because we see this deck about 30 to 40, like we literally see this deck 1 out of every 3 games. It hurts me so bad. If you like this deck, I'm sorry, but fuck do I hate this deck. I mean, if I have a personality, I'm a human being, and I fucking hate this deck. And I'm sure some of you agree with me and some of you don't agree with me, and they're mad that I think that way, but everybody's, you know, they have their own opinions, and that's my opinion. I fucking hate this deck. I don't even want to go over it. Everybody should know this deck by now, and we're just gonna move on, but I have to bring it up because it's fucking popular as shit. And I don't understand how anybody has fun playing that deck. Moving to Even Shaman, an actual fun deck to play. Still not very hard to play, but still much more fun to play. We played this deck quite a few games earlier in the season. We did pretty well. We went from, again, rank 5 to rank 3 in like less than 20 games. And then we switched to some meme deck and went back down to rank 5, but that's besides the point. This deck's power level comes from being able to play to hero power with your totems every turn. You have a lot of cards that synergize well with your totems, like Direwolf, Alpha, Earthen Might, Flame Tongue Totem, Knife Juggler, yes, and Sea Giant. From there, you basically play minions on your turns that you're being able to hero power and or totem, or just playing a minion. And most of your minions, again, are pretty strong on their own and have a very substantial ability that allows them to either continuously generate value or to have a battle cry that gives you more value, or to basically buff minions on the board. So every card in this deck actually does something, either when played or at the end of the turn, or it allows an aura to be able to buff the minions beside it. Very smooth, very synergetic deck. Like, this deck just works, it flows very, very nicely. You get a lot of cheesy wins by just being able to play shit on the board. You know, you drop like a Flame Tongue Totem next to your Corpse Taker. Corpse Taker has Wind Fury, and you're able to smash your opponent in the face with a 5/3 Wind Furied minion with Divine Shield and light. Like, it's just craziness. Very powerful deck. I don't want to say it's weak to decks that have a good amount of AoE, because this deck doesn't have a lot of draw. As you notice, there's no Mana Tide Totem in this deck. There's no Farsight. There's no Alkali to Pain. There's no really card that allows this deck to draw after it's exhausted most of his resources, besides the Hagatha. And yeah. So besides Hagatha, this deck has very minimal comeback once its hand has been depleted. But board states in this particular deck are very hard to get around because of their hero power to totem. So let's say it's turn like 4 or 5, they have 2 totems and a Flame Tongue Totem in between, and maybe like a small minion. It looks like a substantial board, but there's actually only 2 minions on the board, and the other 2 are just totems, but they're buffed by the Flame Tongue Totem, which makes them look like threats. So very interesting thing there. The next class we're going to talk about, this meta has so many decks that are actually good. It's crazy. It's probably one of the most diverse metas I've seen in quite some time, but unfortunately there's just some decks that overtake other decks, and no matter what you do in those certain matchups, you just lose. But it still doesn't mean there's not a lot of other decks that also win and people are playing. So right now we're taking a look at the Miracle Rogue deck. It puts a lot of early chip damage in with its smaller minions. Then from there, it does huge burst damage with Leroy Jenkins, Cold Bloods, Abysses, stuff like that. The miracle of it, you play Gadgets and Auctioneer, you use Prep, Backstab, Cold Bloods, Hallucination, Abyss, Saps. You just have a bunch of cheap spells, you combo them all together, you make big Van Cleefs, or you push big damage with, like I said, Leroy Jenkins, or summon a bunch of spiders from the Fandral Strider. You know, you're drawing a bunch of cards, you have a higher chance to draw a spider. This deck performs very well against control decks and very slow mid-range decks. It is very weak against aggro decks. For those of you who are like, Rob, why are you playing Auctioneers instead of the sprints? You can run sprint instead of Auctioneer. It's one of those cards where you just kind of pick it. I would honestly test 1 Auctioneer, 1 sprint, see which one works better for you, then go 2 to 0, and then, flop back. But currently I'm running 2 Auctioneers in mine. I'll probably move to 1 Auctioneer, 1 sprint soon. I don't play a ton of Miracle Rogue, but I know sprints are being used now because I've seen a lot on ladder. I've seen a lot of people talk about it. So definitely want to mention it, and definitely a new inclusion to the deck. Again, very powerful deck, very, very hard to play at 100% correctly. The next deck we're going to talk about is going to be Odd Rogue, much easier deck to play than the Miracle Rogue. Probably has just as high as a win rate. I've seen some people climb exceedingly fast with this Odd Rogue. We're talking like rank like 4 to legend in 2 days, less than 60 games played. I mean, you can just go on a tear with this deck just because of the ability to play such a strong hero power, to be able to 2 mana get a 2/2 weapon. You can go face for 4 for 2 mana and or kill off minions and play your own minions that are pretty resilient. And again, this deck can do a huge amount of damage in one turn because it does run, again, Cold Blood, Deadly Poison, Leroy Jenkins, Vile Spine, Slayer, Fungal Mancer, Scalebanes, Vicious Fledgling. I mean, there's just numerous cards in this deck that are like need to be dealt with. If not, the game's over. Again, one of the major problems with decks like this is it has no card draw. So very similar to the even Shaman. Once this deck runs out of steam, it runs out of steam very fast. But if you're playing against a very greedy control deck, or a very greedy mid-range deck that doesn't actually have the control it needs to be able to deal with an early deck like this, it's just going to lose that every time, which what we're seeing now. Because if this deck wouldn't be good, and neither would this deck wouldn't be good if control decks weren't as greedy. If control decks actually played more early game removal, decks like this wouldn't exist. Like, in theory, I don't think this deck is very good. But because of the way the meta has shaped and people get so fucking greedy with their deck lists, decks like this form and they do very, very well. But I mean, casters and many players have said like they don't understand why. Like, the hero power is good, but this deck should be built differently. It needs to be more mid-rangey than base, and right now it's very, very, very aggressive. But either way, powerful deck, people love it. Pretty fun to play. Yeah, good stuff. The next deck we're going to take a look at, and the last class we're going to go over, is going to be the Paladin. That's going to be Odd Paladin. Again, another very powerful deck, very good at being able to put minions on the board and buff those minions. So if we had to compare two similarities, even Shaman and Odd Paladin, kind of very similar in what they do. Instead of summoning totems, you're summoning 1/1 dudes, and you're buffing those 1/1 dudes with cards like Raid Leader and Stormwind Champion and Level Up. Very similarly in the Even Shaman, you're playing totems, you're buffing them with Flame Tongue Totem, Dire Wolf, being able to play Sea Giant because you have a lot of minions on the board, which are totems. You're also able to combo them with, did I say Knife Juggler already? No, I mentioned Flame Tongue, Dire Wolf, Knife Juggler, and then Sea Giant. Yeah, so yeah, very powerful deck here. You basically throw up on the board in the early stages of the game, ton of 1-drops, ton of 3-drops. From there, you throw up, you play, what is it? Divine Favor, there it is. Draw a bunch of new cards. By then, turn 5, Fungal Mancers and Leroy Jenkins are looking pretty thick. Level Up in the later stages in Stormwind Champion. Vine Cleaver is a fantastic card to continuously build up on the board. I mean, this deck, literally every turn you're summoning anywhere between 2 to 4 minions, because your hero power is going to summon 2, and then from there you're going to be able to play at least 2 more, whether it's a Stonehill Defender, Raid Leader, Lost in the Jungle, Firefly, which summons 2 additional minions, and then Blessing of Might, which is additional burst. I mean, this deck just has decent amount of burst, has weapons to buff your minions, has minions to buff your minions, have a hero power to make more minions, and has weapons that makes more minions. Like, it's just good. The only problem with this deck is, again, one of those things is when it runs out of steam, it has no draw. The only 2 draws in the deck are from Divine Favor. So either if you play against a more aggressive base deck, you throw up on the board, they throw up on the board, they don't have a hand, you don't have a hand, Divine Favor doesn't do literally anything. Key is, if you play against a control deck, you throw up on the board, they have a full hand, they use Defile, they clear your board, you Divine Favor, get a whole new hand again, throw up on the board, do you have another Defile? If not, you win. So, this deck has a little bit more resilience in regards to being able to continuously pump out threats, because it actually has a draw mechanic that does well against control decks. The problem is, if you're playing against another aggro deck, you don't have as much draw, but that's then from there, you just go for the value matchup and just try to win over the board, because you know your opponent doesn't have AoE because you are an aggro deck and they're an aggro deck. So again, you have to play it very specific based on the matchup, but I mean, that kind of goes for any deck you're going to play. But this is, again, very powerful deck, and again, very limited thought decisions, because there's not a lot of spells in this deck, you know what I mean? It's like, do I play a minion? Like, which minion do I play? There's only, what, 4 spells, 5 spells in the end. You got 2 Divine Favors, and then besides that, you have 2 Mights into level ups. You play level ups when you have a lot of Silverhand recruits. You play your Blessings of Might. You're going face and you're going to push lethal the next turn. You're killing a big minion, and then you play your Divine Favor if you have no cards in your hand. Those aren't hard decisions to make. The other decisions are basically which is the best minion to play every turn, and that's determining on your situation and judging what your opponent has in their hand. But anyway, with that, thanks for watching. If you have anything to add on to what I've said, feel free to do that in the comment section below. I'm sure a lot of newer players or intermediate players would love to hear what you veteran guys have to say about the decks that I brought up, or things that I might have missed in our comments of the deck. So with that, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next monthly meta and or in another video. Of course, guys, I'm Rob or Warshack, and happy whatever the hell day it is.